A very good morning. Labour have won a third consecutive term in office. They've passed the threshold they need for an outright majority in the Commons, 324 seats.
Should be okay.
Tony Blair says it's a tremendous privilege, but his majority looks like being more than halved.
Right.
We don't have lots of party workers coming out to cheer him in. It's a fairly sort of sparse Downing Street.
The third election victory was in many ways portrayed as almost a quasi-defeat, but of course it wasn't. It was still a substantial victory.
Good morning, everyone.
And I knew I was much more politically weak, of course, and there would be constant pressure on me to set a time for going and to go. But by then I really did know how to make government work, and I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to achieve.
When I stood here first, 8 years ago, I was a lot younger, but also a lot less experienced.
And I can tell you this, and whether people believe it or they don't believe it, that's entirely up to them. I governed as I believed.
And I think I have a very clear idea of what the British people now expect from this government for a third term.
Of course, Gordon is extremely impatient, but the key thing is to protect the agenda and the legacy.
Thank you.
Prime Minister, can you do everything you want to do with such a small majority?
In the end, it's down to you. I'd come to the view that my job was to do the best for the country, and I was going to do it.
Gordon Brown has ruled himself out of the contest.
Tony Blair is elected leader of Labour.
Mr. Brown, having wanted to step in for so long, now gets the opportunity.
Tonight, the man who wants to lead the Labour Party to a third victory after 8 years at number 10, the Prime Minister, Tony Blair.
So in the early part of 2005, we were not in a particularly great place. Remember, the election campaign was being played out against the backdrop of the Iraq War. And to state the bleedingly obvious, it wasn't very popular.
When you presented your evidence to the House of Commons, you said it was authoritative and full evidence. That is a lie. You lied to this country, and that's why we can't support you at the following election.
As a guy I admired, but also someone who was a friend, that was a really uncomfortable thing to experience. But the Prime Minister had to wear it. It was his war. It was his war.
There's a sense of panic about the possibility of losing.
Tony Blair goes into this election with the Tories very close behind him in the polls, and his lead is falling.
And at that point, critical moment, Tony basically believes that it is only really by reconciling with Gordon that he can head off the risk of defeat.
The relationship was in a pretty bad way. As the election started, there was a real problem, and that's why they had to be brought back together and made the campaign together.
Am I the only person doing this sort of stuff, though? Are you sure?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, Tuesday, 29th of March, 2005, memo, TBGB as key campaign driver. Why? The relationship is now perceived by the media as negative. They sense mistrust, even loathing. Yet for the public, much more important, there remains strength in the relationship and what it says about Labour past and future. GB's met the challenge to keep the economy strong. GB is clearly the favourite to take over when TB stands down. We can and must make it a strength for the campaign. How? We take the media by surprise at the outset by TB and GB campaigning together.
We came into Parliament 22 years ago.
And by the first election broadcast being about the two of them.
So whatever the difficulties and whatever the tensions are a few from time to time, that actually it's a partnership that's worked.
There's no doubt there was real tension between them. Tony was trying very hard.
Where is he?
Not to let that show.
Here, Gordon. Not often a chance to get some.
The ice cream moment was both slightly excruciating, but very funny, I thought. Tony giving the ice cream and Gordon really not being sure what to do with it.
You don't get much for nothing these days.
Okay, it maybe looked a little bit stilted at times, but whatever the difficulties that were there, they were still the two most formidable powers in that government.
See you.
United we stand, divided we fall. If Tony and Gordon worked together, that would be great. And if the divisions were obvious, that would be disastrous.
At 6 o'clock, an historic third term for Labour. 1997, 2001, and now 2005. Tony Blair's back at number 10, but his majority is slashed by nearly 100 seats.
Tony Blair is spending the weekend finalising the shape of the ministerial team which will oversee Labour's third term.
Tony had given a commitment that if we won again, he, Tony, would not serve a full third term. Now, I thought that was a profoundly foolish thing to have done. And I said to him, the only question from the moment of victory onwards that people would be asking is when? When are you going?
This election has greatly enhanced Gordon Brown's claim to be Labour leader. He's widely credited with limiting the damage inflicted on Labour's majority.
We all knew during the election campaign that the minute it was over, Gordon would be demanding a date for Tony to go.
Do you like the feel of being in the driving seat?
I'm here, but I've not been given permission to drive.
By then I'd come to the recognition there was a difference between us in policy terms that was not going to be resolved. Well, I knew the period was going to be a race against time. Putting my foot flat down on the floor and racing ahead with the changes we were making.
Tony Blair has promised to create more city academies in England.
Not just a replacement for failing schools, but the model of the entire English school system.
Tony had a real belief that if you gave hospitals, but also schools, more independence, they would be more innovative and they'd be more responsive.
From today, anyone who needs a non-emergency operation will be entitled to have it at any foundation hospital in England and a number of private clinics.
Tony was very impatient. Why can't we have this now? He was absolutely convinced that if he stood down the big public service reforms, choice, diversity, higher quality public services, that would go.
I didn't think Gordon was going to drive forward with those changes. I thought this transformation agenda that we were pursuing was best pursued under me and not him. I was no longer playing politics. I was flat out governing at the same time as, the incoming fire was going to be pretty heavy.
Morning, folks. Welcome to the Labour Party conference in Brighton. This afternoon is the turn of the outgoing king in the form of Tony Blair, who seems to be in no rush to step down.
When the Blair government really starts to accelerate on those reforms, there was a genuine feeling that this was not vintage Labour Party anymore.
Labour members on the whole are a pretty loyal bunch, but with some of the more radical ideas he's trying to push through at the moment, he's stretching loyalty to breaking point.
At that point, I think there was an imperative to talk a little bit to the party. Blair had never had to do that for a long time because he'd won enormous majorities, and I think to some extent he'd got out of the habit of having to worry about it.
And the question now for us, how do we secure the future for our party and for our country? And the answer lies in understanding why we can celebrate these victories.
In Blair's view, to describe the change to a major system like the health system or the education system in terms which are just hospitable to the Labour Party is to narrow your focus.
The world is on the move again. So now, in turn, we have to change again. Not step back from New Labour, but step up.
We, the New Labour crowd, are up with the pace of the world, and you, the Labour Party, are somewhat behind.
Every time I've ever introduced a reform in government, I wish in retrospect I'd gone further. Specialist schools, denounced at the time, have performed better than traditional comprehensives. Fact.
The moment he starts to have real views and really knows what he's for and really have a plan and a programme, they don't like it so much.
Tony was always more centrist than his party. In the early days, the Faustian bargain was, well, we'll have you as a centrist leader because you can get us into power. Then you win the 2005 election, you only get 36%. You don't seem to be as popular as you were. People start to drift away.
Once you admit you're going to go, even if you haven't set a timetable, your power starts draining away. People start turning like sunflowers to the new sun.
You had a group of people who felt that Labour could not rediscover its soul, could not reconnect to the voters until Tony Blair went and Gordon Brown came in.
Okay.
People forget now, but Gordon spent quite a lot of the Labour government being the most popular politician in Britain, and he was at that time.
Pretty smiling Gordon Brown these days, though many people will be wondering whether, with all that to do, just how quickly Tony Blair does indeed intend to step down from 10 Downing Street.
I had a very clear agenda of what I wanted to achieve, and I felt that you have a shelf life in politics. Everybody has a shelf life in politics. You can't expect that people are going to like you if you've been around for too long. I think Tony made a decision that he would stay on for some of the third term, but he wasn't going to stay on for a fourth term. I think we just had to accept that. That was what he wanted to do, and I wasn't agitating. I just accepted that.
It was only later that I really discovered that for quite some time, Gordon had been, storming in to see Tony, and Gordon would be saying, "When are you going to go? When are you going to go? When are you going to let me be Prime Minister?"
I certainly remember there being a couple of meetings. They generally happened in number 11 Downing Street. I think we wanted to have a conversation about what's the timetable, how would we choreograph this, whereas Tony wanted to make the discussions about philosophy. He wanted to know what Gordon's approach would be, how different from his, making sure that his legacy was going to be secure.
I would try to persuade Gordon and his team as to why it was important to carry on with this New Labour position. So we were debating it and, toing and froing on it.
It felt like a big evasion. It felt as though this was something which was being done instead of getting on with it. And that was always destabilising for Gordon, because that felt like, was he being a fool waiting?
The tension was quite palpable. I often felt it in cabinet. Tony was sitting in the middle as Prime Minister. Gordon as Chancellor sitting directly opposite. Great big pile of papers in front of him, not looking at Tony. He was just so angry that he wasn't sitting where Tony was.
Occasionally I'd get stuck on these 3-hour phone calls between Gordon and Tony and I couldn't get off. They were very stormy conversations. They were really very tangled, lots of guilt and about moral this and moral that. It was, as I say, a very, very emotional, marriage very much like, a relationship very much like a troubled marriage, I'd say.
Yeah, there were occasions when you would hear, shouting and screaming, and we would sit on the other side of the door looking slightly anxious and concerned, perhaps like, kids hearing their parents having a row and, looking at each other quizzically.
I mean, one of the things with Gordon and myself is that we could be completely frank with each other. I mean, it was like two members of a family. As I say, for me at least, the affection was always present.
You've got to remember, in every government, there's disagreements. Politics is about people who come together to try to resolve what are different positions from which they start. And of course it was portrayed as ambition on someone's part to stop someone else doing something, but that wasn't the point. There was a period of tension, but it was probably creative in that I think we got a better result because of that.
All of those Labour MPs and others who are calling for a timetable for transition from the Prime Minister to yourself, your people who speak your language, what's your message to them?
The vast majority of people, mainstream opinion, in the Labour Party, and indeed right across the country, in my view, want what we've talked about, which is a stable and orderly transition.
I'm enough of a historian to know that in politics, there are no orderly transitions and no dignified departures. You're either in power or you're not.
Tony gave an interview to the Times at the end of the summer where he wanted to try and get across that he wasn't going to stay forever and ever, that he was going to go. But unfortunately, the way he did the interview, the main point that came out of it was that he wouldn't give a timetable for going.
Prime Minister, why won't you set a timetable to go?
I think I gave an interview where I ended up appearing to rule out going, and I hadn't really meant to be honest, because there was no point in doing that, and it wasn't my intention anyway. And I think that was what then provoked the letters, actually.
Good afternoon. Well, they've finally put their heads above the parapet. A group of Labour MPs has written to Tony Blair, urging him to step down as Prime Minister.
Here it comes. It was only a matter of time.
Mr. Blair, have you had any letters today?
17 Labour MPs, including a minister, signed a letter calling on Tony Blair to go and go soon.
You very rarely got Labour MPs calling on Tony to go. And now you had people that were our friends saying that it was time to move on.
In the last few seconds, the Press Association reporting that the Labour MP Tom Watson has resigned as Junior Defence Minister.
There has been a second resignation.
And then what they tried was a series of what I described as suicide bombers.
4 more parliamentary private secretaries.
Junior officials like PPSs resigning one after another to try and create a sense of momentum that everything was running out for Tony.
Letters, resignations and talk of plots. But who started this remarkable chain of events? Was the resident of number 11 pulling all the strings? It suits the Prime Minister's henchmen to point the finger in that direction.
It wasn't something that we were kind of involved in agitating for. But the easy thing to do is to say, oh, well, it was all a brown cabal. The truth was, I think by that point, the parliamentary party had had enough.
Will Tony Blair, like Margaret Thatcher, be forced out of office not by the electorate, but by his own party?
I was so angry. I was so angry about it. I just thought, how dare they? And how damaging to the Labour Party and the government and what we were all trying to do.
Not a lot of work happened that day. I can remember looking out of my window. My office overlooked the garden, and therefore I could see the patio. Tony sitting outside because he likes to sit outside in the sun. Gordon being quite assertive, slightly uncomfortable, probably also quite conscious that we were all watching.
Can you recall what was discussed in those committees?
I don't recall this as being that important. I got to be honest, at this time, 2006 autumn, I was pretty distracted. My daughter died when she'd 10 days old in 2002, and my second son was being diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. I was quite out of events at that time, so to me, September 2006 does not seem a very important set of dates.
Look, again, I mean, the coup obviously caused a lot of bad feeling amongst my people. I mean, and I tried to say to people, look, it's inevitable. I mean, it's going to happen. We've been here 9 years.
Prime Minister? Prime Minister, what's going on?
Tony was doing a school visit where he was going to announce that he'd be standing down in the middle of the following year. And I was with Gordon in Gordon's flat, and Tony ran Gordon on his mobile, and they had this long conversation, just the two of them, not through the Downing Street switchboard, about what Tony should say, how he should say it. And it was, I mean, it was very tender and very close. It was a kind of conversation I think they would have had in the late 1980s when they shared an office in Parliament, before they were shadow cabinet ministers.
Yeah. Prime Minister, there's been a great deal of speculation about your future. Are you ready to put that speculation to rest now?
I would have preferred to do this in my own way, but as has been pretty obvious from what many of my cabinet colleagues have said earlier in the week. The next party conference in a couple of weeks will be my last party conference as party leader.
I took it pretty philosophically. I was not going to fight a fourth election. Yeah, of course, it's somewhat hurtful. People you've been working for want to get rid of you, but, you know, this is politics. You're not stupid about it.
And now, the Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party, Tony Blair.
The conference speech was always the big one, every year, irrespective of the fact that it's your final one.
I'd actually like to start by saying something very simple. Thank you for giving me the extraordinary privilege of leading you these past 12 years. Thank you.
I was, in some ways, ready to go. I was very keen to go out and into the world. I had lots of things I wanted to do. I felt, you know, the country wanted change. The Labour Party probably thought was the right thing for there to be change, at least of leadership. So.
The truth is, you can't go on forever. That's why it's right that this is my last conference as leader. And of course, it's hard to let go, but it's also right to let go for the country and for you, the party. You know, they say, I hate this party and its traditions. Well, I don't. I love this party. There's only one tradition I ever hated: losing. Next year, I won't be making this speech, but in the years to come, Wherever I am, whatever I do, I'm with you. Wishing you well, I'm wanting you to win. You're the future now, so make the most of it.
It was the best speech I gave as a party leader. It was probably actually the best received. But that's, you know, what I always say to people, the Labour Party did actually change. But the party itself felt proud of what it had done.
And as he walked away, I sort of thought that was the end. Not just of him, but of New Labour.
It's a very big day here at Westminster, even historic.
We are now witnessing the handover of power. Gordon Brown enters Downing Street as Britain's new Prime Minister.
By the time it came to 2007, I had a clear idea of what I wanted to achieve.
It is the culmination of a lifelong dream for him.
All my life, I believed that if you give people the chance to do things and value their potential, they will respond.
I have just accepted the invitation of Her Majesty the Queen to form a government.
I wanted to expand opportunities in housing, people to have more opportunities in education. That was my passion. It was a challenge I relished.
On this day, I remember words that have stayed with me since my childhood. My school motto, I will try my utmost. This is my promise to all of the people of Britain. And now let the work of change begin. Thank you.
The phrase, let the work of change begin, embodied the tensions as to whether Gordon's premiership represented something fundamentally familiar or something fundamentally different.
Gordon was very worried about divides in Labour becoming a defining feature of the government. And so there's quite a lot of continuity from the previous cabinet.
Gordon actually believed in much of that New Labour project. He was an architect of it along with Tony Blair. So I think Gordon was caught between being a continuation of the Blair agenda and being a disruptor and a change.
Gordon had prepared a lot of policy initiatives that he wanted to do in those first few weeks, but they kind of got drowned out because events always have a habit of taking over the agenda.
We've an eyewitness report from Glasgow Airport that within the last half hour, a car tried to drive through the main doors of the terminal building.
We had the terror attacks, but then we had tremendous floods in July.
Water has swirled in, power has been cut off, and residents are leaving.
And then, of course, we had the foot and mouth outbreak in August.
Britain's farming community is facing very, very serious problems.
Within the space of 3 months, we had a whole series of crises that I had to deal with one after another.
Thanks very much. Sorry about being a bit late.
To me, that was what the business of being a leader and being a Prime Minister was about.
We obviously don't want a repetition of some of the problems that we were faced with last night.
He handles them in a very Gordon way, absolutely on it, day or night.
The supply of water itself and the speed at which it's coming.
He was always on top of the detail, and he always wanted to get into the weeds of what was happening.
What he was so good at was being unflashy about it.
It's nice to meet you. You've had a long night, haven't you?
And that played to his nature. That's the sort of politician he is.
Glad to say the Prime Minister has joined us now. Very good morning to you, Mr. Brown. We're going to discuss those issues very, very soon. But first of all...
What, of course, was really fascinating was that, you had now a 24-hour media.
The root of some of these attacks, some people say it's because of our presence in places like
There is no
Iraq
justification. You're being asked, you know, what are you going to do about the floods, foot and mouth, and Iraq? And at the same time, what do you think of the latest plot in Coronation Street, EastEnders, and what's happening in the Premier League?
Even the weather's depressingly familiar at Wimbledon. It's same old, same old.
It's really sad about Wimbledon, isn't it? But we can look forward to Silverstone. All these things were expected of a Prime Minister to be able to answer.
Gordon Brown, Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed for sparing your very valuable time.
It's a pleasure to be here. Hope you'll invite me back.
Thank you. Yes, you're welcome anytime.
Thank you very much.
We asked people if this politician was a car, what kind of car would they be? And he was a Volvo. He was safe, he was solid, he was trustworthy. Serious man for serious times. He was exactly what was needed. My team had done an analysis of new leaders and their likely polling prospects. And what we had noticed was that for almost everybody, 3 months in was as good as it tended to get.
The speculation grew and grew that the poll ratings were such that we'd be mad not to be thinking about a snap election.
Welcome to Today at the Conference in Bournemouth, where election fever is back in the air.
How are you? I think the weather's changing a little. Good to see you.
Gordon was uncertain as to which way to jump.
It's getting a bit darker, isn't it? The sky's a bit darker. How are you doing?
Hi.
Enjoy the conference.
He was both desperate for his own mandate and terrified by the prospect of losing his premiership.
I wondered if in the intimate atmosphere of the conference centre here, you wanted to illuminate me on when you felt would be a good time for an election.
Charming as you are, Maria, I think the first person I would have to talk to is the Queen.
He was sort of pushing it away, but never closing it down.
I will stand up for a strong Britain, and I will always stand up for you.
This was a campaign speech by a man who has yet to launch a campaign. He's under huge pressure to do so.
Labour was now on election footing. And at that moment, I thought, well, you know, I mean, I hadn't been told, but I kind of thought, well, they're clearly going for it.
Well, my mistake was to allow speculation to grow. And I didn't see it as a problem during the party conference season because it made people interested in the party conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, David Cameron.
Does he look like a Prime Minister to you? You may have to decide a month from now, and he knows it.
The key thing for David and me was that we weren't going to be facing Tony Blair in a general election. The thing about Tony Blair was he was a sort of Tory-destroying machine. Now all our guns were trained on Gordon Brown.
Mr. Brown, what's it going to be? Why don't you go ahead and call that election? Let the people pass judgment on 10 years of broken promises. Let people decide who's really making the arguments about the future of our country. Call that election. We will fight. Britain will win.
Just over a week ago, one poll gave Labour an 11-point lead over the Conservatives. A day after David Cameron's speech, the gap had narrowed sharply, and one organisation had the main parties level pegging.
We were asked to a meeting at number 10. The polling and the focus groups were not showing the fantastic victory that people would have liked to have seen. That was not what they were predicting. So there was a big discussion in the room about what should happen next.
I'd arranged to spend the whole day up in my constituency having a whole series of election photos taken. And then I then get a call in the middle of the afternoon. He's changed his mind and we're not going for it. Really?
Looking back now, maybe I should have gone for it.
No, because the right thing to do was to see things through. The problem for a new Prime Minister is that you're operating under an old manifesto that is not strictly your own. But if you can't show people you can do the job, then you're not really going to do well in the election. I mean, what I wanted to do was to get on with the work.
And I'm thinking at the time, well, this is going to be really hard.
Good morning. Let's make a start.
There was an agonising press conference.
You ordered your civil servants, you ordered your ministers, and you ordered your party to be ready for an election. And at the last minute, when the polls turned, you turned.
Gordon asserted that he had not considered the opinion polling evidence when reaching his decision, which stretched credulity.
If the News of the World poll had put you would have got a 100-seat majority in the House of Commons, would you still not have called an election?
I'd have made the same decision. My mistake was not that I wanted an election. I didn't. My mistake was that I allowed the speculation to get out of control. And then when I killed it, of course, people thought that I was running away from something I should have done.
Gordon Brown beating a hasty retreat from Downing Street today after taking the most important decision of his political career.
The incredibly positive view of Gordon sapped overnight.
You'd bottled it. That is a phrase that will be heard up and down the country today.
The authority we had been really fundamentally bruised.
He's the first Prime Minister in history to flunk an election because he thought he was going to win it.
In retrospect, I don't think he ever wanted to fight the election from the middle of September onwards, but people were persuading him and he could sort of see the intellectual case, and emotionally, that wasn't really where he was at. He didn't feel ready. He's a very rational man. And maybe in that period, he didn't listen to his gut enough. And if he had done, he would have shut it down much earlier.
Is your government losing its grip, Prime Minister?
For Gordon, the idea of losing grip is probably one of the worst charges you can make. But the story in the press was, what's the next thing that's going to go wrong for Gordon Brown and his team?
The Prime Minister has apologised for the loss of the personal details of 25 million people. That's almost half the population.
These problems land at the door of the Prime Minister, and we had a lot of them.
26 EU leaders have signed the new reform treaty at a ceremony in Lisbon. The only one missing was Gordon Brown.
He did eventually turn up in Lisbon, 3 hours late, and signed the treaty in a room on his own.
They contributed to an idea that he kept making mistakes.
Scrapping the 10p tax rate was hurting, Gordon Brown was told again and again.
It's sinking in that millions on the lowest of incomes will actually pay more tax.
I remember Tony saying, when you're Chancellor, you make a few big decisions. When you're Prime Minister, you are making big decisions, a dozen of them every day. And Gordon can't do that.
What this is about is weakness, dithering and indecision from the Prime Minister.
We had the measure of Gordon Brown. We were ahead in the opinion polls, and there is basically nothing that Gordon Brown can do to turn the situation around.
Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that the Labour Party have finally worked out that they've got a loser, not a leader?
In focus groups, Gordon was always a very strong and powerful creature to voters. And then suddenly that turned back on him and people described him like a sort of tethered bear or a sort of weary plough horse ploughing the same field again and again. There was just this sense of him as this sort of slightly broken figure.
Gordon knew that he was facing very significant challenges and in a very Gordon-like way decided the answer was to work harder. I remember having a conversation with Tom Fletcher, the extraordinarily able Foreign Policy Private Secretary, who, in despair after one Easter weekend, sought me out and said, "Help me, Douglas, I don't know what to do."
You never knew from day to day where Gordon's mind would be going. So we would come to him with, that day's agenda, often decided weeks in advance. And Gordon would look at it and say, why are we doing this?
He used to wake up and get emails that Gordon had sent at 3 o'clock in the morning. Pages and pages of thoughts about something that maybe you'd had a three-minute chat with him about.
The best moment to get Gordon's attention was often at night or over the weekend. So between us, we somehow sustained and encouraged a machine which was actually relentless. And for him, exhausting.
I think we had the coming together of a whole series of different problems, and you know, perhaps I could have done better at communicating what I was trying to do, and I feel that was something that I should have and wanted to do better. But I think as far as dealing with the problems, I was dealing with them on a day-to-day basis in the best way I could, and that's what I was trying to do.
Is this the man to turn things round for Gordon Brown?
I'm very proud to have been invited to serve in his government. It's not what I was seeking, and it's certainly not what I was expecting.
I went in to see Gordon. I hadn't spoken to him for years. And we talked, and then he turned to me and said, "Can you help me?"
Mr. Mandelson is a big political beast, the top headline in today's cabinet changes.
The cabinet was a bit fractured and fractious. But the main problem was Gordon's confidence in himself. And I said, "You've got to look better, fitter. People have got to feel that there's a sort of inner repose." And people expect all the time him to communicate as if he knows what he's doing and why he's doing it and what he's going to do next. It's called leadership.
In truth, I think Gordon's premiership was saved by the global financial crisis.
Chris, good morning to you. As the Wall Street Journal is saying this morning, the American financial system has been, and I'm quoting here, shaken to its core.
Financial institutions are in trouble. 158-year-old Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy.
Financial markets around the world went into free fall today as confidence in the banking system fell sharply.
From the moment that Lehman's collapsed, Gordon was utterly focused, laser-like, on the global economy. He felt that this was his issue.
Gordon said, "I want more information. I want all the information you can get me." We bought up every single book there was. He would take off the cover and throw it, and then he would devour the book.
All eyes are on number 10 tonight, where Gordon Brown is in crisis talks.
This was an enormous crisis, and it needed, you know, a big personality to sort it out.
18 out of 20 of the American banks were in danger of falling. Others were in danger of collapsing as well in Britain and many in Europe. It was not only catastrophic for the world economy, it threatened to get worse and worse every day unless we acted.
The frantic day of selling on the London Stock Exchange has seen the value of 4 of Britain's biggest banks slashed.
You had a massive run on RBS, which is the biggest bank in the world at that time. I spoke to the then chairman, "How long can you last?" And he said 2 or 3 hours. And this was the biggest bank in the world, was going to run out of money in 2 or 3 hours. And just imagine if the cash machines went off, the doors shut, you'd have had an absolute panic.
Good morning. Up and down the country, families and small businesses are worried and anxious about their futures. And I know and understand this.
I think our government was the first in the world to understand what the real problem was, that we were effectively seeing banks who were running capitalism without capital.
This is not a time for conventional thinking or outdated dogma, but for the fresh and innovative intervention
that gets to the heart of the problem. When you've got a crisis and the economy is broken down and the financial sector can't deliver what it should, the government has got to step in.
£400 billion is being made available to help Britain's biggest banks through these extraordinary times.
First, the government will part nationalise banks that need help to stay afloat. The cost, up to £50 billion of taxpayers' money. We'll all become, in effect, shareholders in them, shares the government hopes one day to sell for a profit.
The amounts of money were eye-watering, eye-watering. He knew it was taking a massive risk, but he also thought there was absolutely no alternative. It was an existential question, a matter of survival for our economy.
So far, the markets have responded well to the bailout.
We got to grips with that quickly, and then we acted on that, as we still had to persuade other countries to do the same, otherwise Britain would be isolated.
Europe has been unable so far to unite in the face of this unfolding financial crisis, but the Prime Minister is still confident of finding a solution.
The Prime Ministers of France and Germany would be there in a room, and Gordon would go in. I mean, not invited, go in and say, we need to do really big things we've never done before, and we all need to work together.
Another day, another country. On Gordon Brown's whistle-stop tour.
Gordon had immense authority and the hunger in his eyes about persuading leaders around the world that this was the right way to do it.
For me, the exhilarating moments were normally on the flight back from a foreign trip. And we might have a drink or two, Gordon would tell some stories, and then we would sit down together and work on the next big idea.
And around that time, the idea percolated from Gordon that what we needed to do was create an international moment.
They've come to the G20 summit to try to drag the world's economy out of the worst downturn in living memory.
Well, what we'd managed to do was to bring America, China, India, and Europe all together. So this was quite a unique gathering, and Britain was chairing it.
World leaders came to London to, come under his leadership in how they should be responding to the global financial crisis.
There was only one outcome that mattered, and that was confidence. We had to signal that the leaders of the world were coordinating a response. So we needed a big number on the funds that they would re-inject into the global economy.
World leaders are dining in Downing Street now to thresh out what appear to be the last details of a rescue plan.
Gordon had got it set up that we would use the old dining room. You can imagine it's a quite Churchillian setting.
I quoted Winston Churchill to everybody who was sitting around that dinner table. He had said of the 1930s that politicians had been resolved to be irresolute, adamant for drift, solid for fluidity, and all-powerful for impotence, and we could not allow ourselves to be in that position.
Can I start, sir?
You're out, thanks. Let's go. Let's go, please.
Sarkozy gave a quite histrionic account of how no one had an idea what to do. And at the end of it, he said, the problem is, no one has a plan. And there was silence, and Barack Obama tapped the microphone and just said, I think Gordon has a plan.
Gordon Brown called it the start of a new world order. Barack Obama said the G20 summit was historic. After a day and a half of negotiations, the leaders of the world's most influential nations have signed up to a $1 trillion deal to revive the world economy and boost trade.
When people saw us coming together and they saw we were prepared to underpin the world economy by $1 trillion, that rebuilt confidence in the system.
This is the day that the world came together to fight back against the global recession.
I wasn't always ahead of events, but when it came to the financial crisis, I do think I did get ahead of events and managed to solve some of these problems.
Gordon was very much the man of the moment. And I think, people who had perhaps lost a bit of faith in him as Prime Minister suddenly found all, their former belief in him rekindled.
I always say to people when they criticize, look, when the financial crisis happened and he brought the world together in that way, you've got to pay tribute to that. That was a massive intellectual
and political achievement. He was immensely capable. Is immensely capable.
The agreement to strengthen the global economy with an additional $1 trillion.
The following morning, I was wheeling my son up to the nursery, utterly exhausted, and suddenly burst into tears and felt, we really have been at the heart of something amazing here. I don't know whether Gordon ever got to have that moment.
Unemployment is rising faster than at any time in the last 30 years. The latest figures show that in the
800
first...
homes were repossessed in the first 3 months of this year. That's
because of the global downturn. The job losses have been savage.
Very quickly, as I recall, the Conservative opposition started to criticise us, saying, this is Labour's mess.
David Cameron.
Which infuriated us and infuriated Gordon, because we did what we had to do.
There is only one person we want to add to the unemployment register, and that is this Prime Minister.
The argument was it was the government who had caused the recession. Clearly it had been caused in America. Clearly it was the banks that had caused the breakdown. I've got to be realistic about this. I did not get my message across. That was possibly something that others might have done better, but I tried my best.
They would say it wasn't their fault. I would say they contributed to it, but that's irrelevant. The public, all they see is their livelihoods disappearing, their jobs disappearing, and it's very, very hard. When the economy collapses and you're the people in charge, particularly if you've been in charge for a long time, basically your time's up.
The Queen has kindly agreed to the dissolution of Parliament, and a general election will take place on May the 6th.
We knew it was going to be an uphill climb. We knew the idea of winning a fourth term was something that was probably not possible.
Britain is on the road to recovery, and nothing we do should put that recovery at risk.
Fourth time round is always going to be tougher, isn't it? But new leader, fourth time, no, I thought it was possible we could win.
I think everybody, after, 12, 13 years in government, could do with some rest and relaxation, but I don't think that was the issue.
Let's go to it. Thank you very much.
People may be tired of us rather than us being tired.
And then they were off, scattering across Britain to the constituencies they hope to win.
Gordon is a fantastic campaigner. Actually, he was much better at it than Tony.
What age are you? 5.
It energised him. It gave him that kind of oomph to go forward.
The old election campaign style of the soapbox and the stump and the big rally, that was the kind of politics Gordon loved.
Taking responsibility, doing your duty, being honest, looking out for others, and that is the right way. It is your way and it is my way.
Now, in a moment, as Big Ben strikes 10, we'll be able to give the result of our exit poll for the first
The polls narrowed. I thought we had a chance.
10 o'clock. And this is what we're saying. It's going to be a hung parliament with the Conservatives as the largest party.
Gordon Brown remains the Prime Minister, for now. The three largest parties are now in a struggle over who will end up with the keys to number 10.
Dark, volcanic, morose, but never giving up. That is Gordon's mood. Sitting at his computer, typing out in his big block capitals what a coalition agreement might be like between Labour and the Lib Dems, right through until the very last moment.
Well, I did talk to Gordon a bit after the election result, and he thought it might be possible to put together a coalition with the Lib Dems, but it just seemed to me it wasn't really on. The Lib Dems weren't going to keep Labour in power.
Nick Clegg, the Liberal Democrat leader, has had another face-to-face meeting with David Cameron, and his team are thought to be finalising an agreement with the Conservatives.
The problem is that on the economy, Nick Clegg was basically a Tory, so Gordon was whistling in the wind.
Sue phoned me that final afternoon, come over to Downing Street now, because my sense is we're not going to be here that much longer.
By about lunchtime that day, the atmosphere changed to a sort of wake for New Labour, really. And in a slightly mysterious way, a lot of the main characters from the 13 years of New Labour found their way into our office.
We told jokes. Actually, we told all Gordon's old jokes at him.
Those were good hours, not difficult hours. A gratitude, that's actually the right word, a sense of gratitude for what we had been able to do.
Gordon Brown's staff is coming out of number 10, and Gordon Brown and his wife Sarah are expected to come out together in just a moment.
I have always strived to serve, to do my best in the interests of Britain, its values, and its people. And as I leave the second most important job I could ever hold, I cherish even more the first, as a husband and father. Thank you, and goodbye.
Could we have done things better? Yes, all governments could. But I do think we had a genuine vision of the future of Britain. And at some point, I think we're going to get back to that.